Donald Trump announcing we will be hit with tariffs. They will be 10%, but that is the lowest. That is the minimum amount that Donald Trump announced across the board. So we are very much at the baseline. And a Downing Street source has said this is vindicating our approach, saying no tariffs are good, but this is lower than others. And this is important, they say, because that is the difference between 10 and 20%. That is lots of jobs. And we saw a suggestion from a think tank earlier today that a 20% tariff could mean around 25,000 lost jobs in the UK alone. So if that is the case, it could be a lot easier for the UK economy, for those car manufacturers trying to navigate through this tariff than previously thought. Of course, it's not good. The idea of tens of thousands of job losses, of course, is going to be a huge problem for Downing Street to try and get on top with. But I think for now, there is a bit of a sigh of relief in number 10 that things aren't quite as bad as it would have been. They are saying tonight we are going to keep negotiating coolly and calmly. We want to negotiate a sustainable trade deal and we want to get those tariffs lowered. And of course, Donald Trump just a few minutes ago offered up this olive branch to countries who want to get out of these tariffs. If you lower your trade barriers, we can look at lowering ours. And if you bring your trade and your manufacturing and your jobs to the United States, let's talk. As one of our trade experts was just talking about in the last few minutes, it seems like Donald Trump is now in the mood to do a deal. And of course, when I went over to the White House a couple of weeks ago with the president, with the prime minister, he was saying at the time that he wanted to negotiate a trade deal. Donald Trump said that Keir Starmer was a tough negotiator, that he was worth every penny we were paying him. And behind the scenes, it's very clear to me the UK government have been making the case for why they should be exempt from these tariffs, why they should have the lowest tariff regime. And actually tonight we have seen that approach so far is paying off. And now Downing Street are keeping, of course, in reserve the idea that we could slap those retaliatory tariffs back on the US. But for now, that is off the table while they try and negotiate this deal. And of course, it's probably not going to happen overnight. It might take a few weeks. It could take months for the UK to negotiate this deal, to try and negotiate away those tariffs. But if that can be done, that would be a huge diplomatic win for Keir Starmer.
They're playing a long game, aren't they? And they're playing, I must say, I think it seems now at least, quite a clever game. Natasha, thank you very much indeed. Natasha Clark, LBC's political editor. Listening to that was Lord Bilimoria, founder of Cobra Beer, chair of the International Chamber of Commerce UK, entrepreneur and also an independent peer in the House of Lords. Lord Bilimoria, great to have you with us tonight. As Natasha was just saying there, we feared it could be worse. And yet there's no getting away, is there, that a 10% import levy on UK goods going into the US is far from good news for British business. Evening.
Good evening. The expectation, of course, was 20%. So to that extent, if you look at that chart that Donald Trump held up, the base rate was 10%, and we were one of the few countries that was 10%. Now, he said on that chart, it showed that it is 10% at the moment. Well, that's not right. Actually, the weighted average import duties the US charged on UK goods was 2%. And the weighted average we charge on US goods is 2%. So we've had very low reciprocal tariffs as things stand right now. So to go up from 2% to 10% is a huge jump.
Yeah.
And remember, with the European Union, we have a very basic trade deal, but it's tariff-free. It's duty-free when it comes to trading with the European Union. But let's keep this in context. Compared with China, 34%. I mean, do you know how much the US imports from China? $450 billion a year. And you put 34% duty on that? That's going to hit the American consumer in a huge way. So the inflation is going to be hit very badly with those very high European Union 20%. That's huge as well, the volume of imports from the European Union. But let's put this in context. We are an exporter to the US and an importer from the US, but we have a trade surplus with the US. When it comes to goods, we actually export 60% and we import $60 billion and 58. But wait for this. When it comes to services, we export $126 billion of service to the United States, and we import much less than that, 57 billion. So we have a huge surplus in services, and none of these tariffs affect services. So we're not going to get hit as badly as, say, a country like China, which is primarily goods to the United States, because ours is mainly services exports, where we're very, very strong as a country when it comes to services. So we must keep that in context. And of course, from Americans, he's trying to sell this to American people saying, I'm going to get $6 trillion of investment in and everyone's going to be piling money in over here, and I'm going to lower taxes. Now, this is a challenge that we have as government over here. We've got to prioritize trade. There was no mention of trade in the spring statement at all. And the International Chamber of Commerce said, if we can prioritize trade, you can save 200 billion in efficiencies. You can digitize trade and make it much quicker from 3 months to 1 day.
I want to ask you about that in just a moment, Lord Bilimoria, about how the UK government should respond. Just sticking with the announcement just for a moment, though, as you say, could have been a lot worse in two regards. It could have been a lot worse because we could be China or Vietnam or Japan. Could have been a lot worse because the government was sort of anticipating 20%. We've got 10% instead. That said, what will that 10% new levy mean for British business?
Well, the estimates at 20% that our GDP could drop by as much as 1%, 0.6 to 1%. So you halve that. So it will have an effect. It will mean that it's going to put more pressure on the Chancellor, who's already under pressure, trying to generate growth. But if you put taxes up, which the previous government had put to the highest level in 70 years, this government has increased taxes across the board, including a massive hit that's about to hit us this month of the national insurance rise. How can you generate growth when you've got rising taxes? Donald Trump, on the other hand, is saying, I'm going to lower taxes. So this government's got a real problem if you're going to have tariffs lower your growth. And in any case, you've got low growth forecasts. The OBR forecast was 1% forecast anyway for growth, which is hardly anything.
So
that could come to zero or recession.
It will halve the UK's growth rate.
Yes. And that's going
huge.
to be even more difficult. And the last thing we need as a country for taxes to go up again.
An enormous headache, as you touched on there, Lord Bilimoria, for the Chancellor and for the Prime Minister.
Yes, and also look at the public spending. Spending as a percentage of GDP before the pandemic was 40%. Today it's 45%. To bring that back down, we've got to cut costs by 150 billion pounds. So 2 billion here, 3 billion is not going to shift the dial at all. That's a huge amount. You talk about austerity. I mean, this is if you're going to try and cut to that level.
But it's the case, is it not, that what we just heard means severe spending cuts or further tax rises just got a lot more likely?
Or to genuinely try and generate growth. And that means investment in research and development and innovation. That means investment in education. That means apprenticeships and skills in a much bigger way than we're doing at the moment. That means getting the 9 million people of working age who don't work, many of whom could work again, getting them back to work. All those are the measures that we need to take. And yes, there will have to be some cuts.
Just on that note then, there's a lot of debate, clearly in Westminster, you'll be well aware of this, about how Keir Starmer and Rachel Reeves should respond. Do they retaliate? Do they sort of accept it? What would you like to see the UK government doing in response to Donald Trump's announcements this evening?
The first thing they've got to do is be absolutely measured and cool and calm and collected. I mean, the automobile industry is going to be hit straight away. 25%. We export £9 billion worth of automobiles, and they're luxury automobiles, including Jaguar Land Rover, which is owned by an Indian company, Tata. And Tata's share price has been hit by that. Their Tata Motors price has gone down by 5% as a result of this. So that's going to be bad news for our automobile sector. And pharmaceuticals is another area where we export over £6 billion worth of pharmaceuticals to the United States. That's going to be hit by the 10% tariff as well. So we've got to promote exports much more. We've got to prioritize trade much more. We've got to be cool and calm with the Americans and try and negotiate a trade deal, which is very difficult with America. We've tried twice to negotiate a trade deal over the last 10 years.
But that's what the government's doing. They're talking about calm, pragmatic approach, not rushing into any sort of retaliation like the EU's threatening to do. And as you say, trying to get a trade deal done. So are you sort of supportive with how they've handled this so far?
So far, absolutely. They've not risen to it by retaliating. And remember, America is our biggest trading partner as a single country by miles. And America, whatever we may say, has a special relationship. And Donald Trump loves the United Kingdom. He loves our royal family. So we have a friend, and we've got to make sure we never forget that. And look how powerful America is. With everything that Donald Trump is doing now, the biggest judge of this is going to be tomorrow when the markets open and how the bond markets react in particular. But the American economy is so strong, the whole of European Union, 27 countries, and the UK put together, America's GDP is bigger than all of us put together.
We cannot win a trade war with America.
You can't. There's no point fighting a battle. We've got to work with them and work through this with them.